Cancer Code. Please welcome Dr. Jason Fung. So good to meet with you.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, first of all, what is a nephrologist? We have to know that.
I'm a kidney specialist, so I did my training in the University of Toronto and UCLA, and I practice as a kidney specialist.
What made you write this book on cancer? It really, from start to finish, there's so much information.
I started out treating kidney disease, so I dealt a lot with type 2 diabetes, and therefore I got very interested in the question of how to lose weight, because if you lose weight, your type 2 diabetes will very often get better, and therefore you're going to lower your risk of kidney disease. It turns out that cancer as a disease, and this is not something that I learned in medical school when I went in the 1990s, is actually very much related to our diet and unfortunately also influenced by obesity and type 2 diabetes. Those two diseases will increase your risk of cancer substantially, and to the point that certain cancers, including breast cancer and colorectal cancer, are classified by the WHO as obesity-related cancers.
There's a couple things I'm going to ask you. We have cancer that runs, colon cancer and breast cancer that run in our family. How much of it is genetic? And what do you mean by an evolutionary disease?
So we think of cancer very much as sort of this genetic disease, but it's not. When you look at the how much of cancer can be explained by certain factors such as genetics, it's somewhere around 3 to 5%. Tobacco smoke, in terms of total cancer, around 30%. The diet also plays about a 30% role in cancer, and that's why it's important to understand this role so that we can take measures to reduce our risk, because we can't do anything about our genes, but we can certainly do something about, say, losing weight, reversing type 2 diabetes, and therefore lowering our future risk of cancer. This notion that cancer being an evolutionary disease is, again, one that's relatively recent, one that's sort of popped up over the last 10 years or so, and not so well known. So we thought of cancer as predominantly a genetic disease. That is, we have genes that mutate and that causes cancer, but what was causing those mutations was actually an evolutionary process. That is, it's a response to things that are happening in our environment. So, for example, something like tobacco smoke causes chronic damage to the lung tissue, and in response to that, the cells evolve and therefore become cancerous in a sort of bid to survive. And understanding this leads us to new treatments. So if we understand that cancer is an evolutionary disease and it's evolving almost into sort of this new invasive type of a species, then we should be doing things like immunotherapy, where we boost our defenses against these sort of foreign invaders, because that's what the cancer has become, almost like a foreign species. That's the way our immune system identifies these cancers.
You say that cancer, for cancer to grow, you need the right seed, the right soil, and the right conditions. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah, so once again, this is something that's very important, because diseases are not simply a pure genetic disease. I mean, we have pure genetic diseases like sickle cell anemia, for example. You have the gene, you get the disease, pretty much that's it. But cancer is not like that. If you have a seed and you put it into the desert, it's not going to grow. So even though you have all the right genes within that seed, it's not going to grow until it hits the right conditions. And most cancers are like that. That is, every cell in our body has the potential to get cancer. Every person in the world has the potential to get cancer. In fact, it actually runs much older than that. So animals get cancer, dogs get cancer, rats get cancers. Everything can get cancer, but only under the right conditions. And that's why you need the right seed, so the genetics, but you also need the right soil. So the question is, what is it in our own bodies that is providing that fertile soil for that cancerous seed to sprout? Because we know, if we look back at traditional societies, so you can look at the Inuit sort of in the far north, for example, or they used to have missionaries in Africa that would look at Africans who were following a traditional diet, for example, and they almost never got these types of cancers. So this cancer was actually labeled back then as a disease of civilization. When those Africans started to follow sort of a more westernized lifestyle, predominantly the diet, they started to get those cancers. Same with the Inuit in the far north. Following their traditional diets, they didn't get cancer. As they switched to our diets, they did get cancer. So therefore, something in our diet was providing the right soil. But again, the important part is that that's something we have control over, because we can't control our genetics. We can't control the seed part of it. So let's understand the soil part of it so that we can sort of make some progress.
One of the things that you mentioned in your book is intermittent fasting, which is your specialty. How do you think it reduces the risk of cancer? And let's talk about what you think is the proper intermittent fasting.
Yeah, intermittent fasting is a great tool for maintaining your weight and also reducing type 2 diabetes. So if you don't eat, your blood sugar is going to come down. Therefore, your type 2 diabetes will either get better or go away. Same thing with obesity. So if you don't eat, your body will use up those stores of body fat, and therefore you're going to be able to lose weight. So we know that both the high blood sugars and the high body weight are big risk factors for the development of these specific cancers, those obesity-related cancers, and therefore fasting can play a role to reduce the obesity, reduce the type 2 diabetes. In terms of fasting, it's actually part of everyday life. So if you think about how people ate in the 60s and 70s, for example, you would eat dinner and then you wouldn't eat again until breakfast. So suppose you had dinner at 6 and breakfast at 8 a.m. That was a 14-hour period of fasting that everybody did without even thinking about it. But that's where the word breakfast comes in, right? Break fast. It's a meal that breaks your fast, which implies that you need to fast in order to break it. So it's just a part of everyday life. It's simply a way of switching yourself so that your body is spending more time in the fasted state where you're using calories, not storing calories.
And I do want to remind everyone to please check with your doctor before trying anything new. That's for sure, and I know Dr. Jason Fung would agree with that. One thing I want to talk about very quickly, if you don't mind, although it would take probably an hour or so, cancer treatments, what will they look like in the future?
We've come through these different understandings of cancer. And so for many years, we talked about the genetics of cancer. So we tried to develop these genetic treatments for cancer. And some of them were very successful, but not as successful as we had hoped. But now we've gone into this new sort of evolutionary, ecological view of cancer, looking at how the cancer is changing, how it can be identified, which leads to diseases such as immunotherapy, which are targeted towards that. And also understanding that it's a metabolic disease leads us to say, well, even if we don't treat cancer, how can we prevent cancer? Because we've done screening, and there's certainly a role for that. But if we can prevent the sort of underlying conditions that predispose us to cancer, especially obesity and type 2 diabetes, because those are reversible conditions, then we can we can sort of slow the rise of it because obesity has been growing. And those are new ways to approach this sort of war on cancer that are likely to be far more successful than we've been in the past. So I'm sort of very hopeful for the future that we'll have new treatments such as immunotherapy, new ways to treat people, as well as new ways to prevent future cancer.
Well, we could certainly talk longer, and we will talk to you again, Dr. Jason Fung. But if you want to know more information, the book is called The Cancer Code, and it's out right now.